According to Shelley George, in her article, The Strong Arm of the Law is Weak, approximately 50,000 women and children from around the world are trafficked into the United States specifically for the sex trade each year, coming from places such as South America, Central America, and Eastern Europe. Now, many people believe that sex trafficking is confined to places like Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, but the reality is that sex trafficking occurs in the United States as well. Compounding the problem is the lack of services for women who are trafficked, because many women are never able to escape trafficking because of a lack of proper services. Therefore, one way to help reduce sex trafficking in the United States is provide more services to women who need them to escape the sex trade. In this speech, I will outline why sex trafficking is a problem in the United States with more specific information on the gap in services for victims. Then I will tell you about my proposed solution to the problem, providing more services for trafficking victims. Sex trafficking is defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, which includes women from inside and outside the United States. Sex trafficking occurs for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is poverty. According to Ms. George's article, women who are in poverty are vulnerable to trafficking, and pimps often see them as easy prey because they don't have the resources to take care of themselves. If women are foreign-born, pimps will often take control of their resources, such as their money and passports, to make sure that they are trapped. According to Kimberly Cotrola's article, Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking in the United States, demand for prostitutes is another reason why sex trafficking occurs, and this demand makes sex trafficking a big business. There is a lot of money invested in keeping women in the sex trade, as it is a $32 billion a year industry. This kind of money, however, is unavailable to help women exit the sex trade. Not only are women and children trafficked into the U.S. for the sex trade, but American women and children are trafficked as well. It is estimated that over 14,000 people are trafficked within the United States each year. Chief among those trafficked inside the U.S. are runaway teens who are preyed upon by pimps in their states of vulnerability. In fact, the average age of a victim of sex trafficking is 12. Because the runaways do not have the resources to make it on their own, they are more likely to fall into the hands of a pimp because they offer the girls more protection and safety to make them more comfortable before forcing them into sexual slavery. In an article in USA Today called Putting a Stop to Human Trafficking, the author talks about how victims are often mentally and physically abused and are subjected to unfair working conditions after the pimp leads them to believe that their life will be easy. Now that I have talked to you about the problem of sex trafficking in the United States, I am going to tell you about the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and how it is inadequate to address the needs of trafficking victims. The three main goals of the TVPA are prevention of trafficking, prosecution of traffickers, and protection of victims. This protection includes providing medical assistance and housing for certified victims of trafficking, as well as helping victims to apply for T visas, a special victim for trafficking victims if they are foreign-born. There are, however, many problems with victim protection in the TVPA. According to Ms. George, in the 10 years that the TVPA has been in action, only 1,300 victims were assisted in applying for a T visa, which is far fewer than the 50,000 trafficked annually. This shows that the enforcement of the TVPA has been apathetic at best. In addition, if women are unable to help in the prosecution of their traffickers, they cannot receive benefits under the TVPA. Finally, there is a problem with making distinctions between the severity levels of victimization. Women can be classified as either severe or not severe, and it can be difficult for her to receive services if she is classified as not severe. If a victim is viewed as being in the sex trade voluntarily, it would be impossible for her to get services. This classification grossly misrepresents the reality of the lives of each woman stuck in sex trafficking, and each woman who seeks services should have access to them. Now that I have talked to you about the problems associated with sex trafficking in the United States, I will attempt to persuade you to believe in my proposed solution, which is to increase the quality and number of services for victims of trafficking. In a recent article in the Tampa Bay Times, there was an example of a trafficking victim rehabilitation center that being opened in the Tampa Bay area by Natasha Nascimento in the next month. Her center will help meet the needs of local trafficking victims, as there were 51 child trafficking victims rescued by the FBI in this area in 2010 and 2011. Nacimiento's home will help bridge the gap in service provision that leads to women and children who are victims of sex trafficking being forced to stay in the sex trade because there are not enough services to adequately care for them. It is important to have a safe and secure environment for victims so that they can recover in dignity and peace. In addition, there must be better enforcement of the TVPA so that there can be an increase in victims receiving services. The more the law is enforced, the more women and children will be rescued, and this is good for society as a whole. More women and children will have productive places in society, and fewer traffickers would be on the street to prey on the most vulnerable members of society. There must be more consistent enforcement of the TVPA so that victims know that they can depend on the criminal justice system and the law. One of the most important steps that must be taken in creating more services for victims is allocating more government funds to create shelters like Redefining Refuge. If there were more shelters and rehabilitation programs for women who have been abused in sex trafficking, there would be fewer women who remain trapped in the sex trade because they would have more resources to keep them from depending on pimps and traffickers. Women would be off the street and would learn to provide for themselves through these programs, and as a society we would have hope for the future that one day sex trafficking could be a thing of the past. As President Barack Obama once said, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the change that we seek." We can't all open homes for victims, but we can support victims by fundraising, continuing to educate others, and donating to service providers. I ask you to consider the need as if it was your mother, sister, or daughter in need of these services. If we all work together, each doing our part to eradicate sex trafficking, the trafficking of thousands within the United States would be no more. One of the things that we value the most as Americans is freedom, and we must extend the right to freedom to everyone through providing services to the women who have had their freedom stolen from them. Thank you.